ahead of time. We've been talking about it for a couple of days now, anticipating Tim's appearance here. The headline stands, Doug Peterson stands between the Eagles and a great collapse. Tim McManus joins us. How great of a collapse are we talking about, T-Mac?
Well, we'll see, and thank you for the kind words, Eytan and Harry. It's great to talk with you guys. I think that we have seen it go both ways for the Eagles in the past, and I think that they're kind of standing sort of on the edge right now of the one of two ways that it can go. I mean, if we look at last year, they were in a position at 4-6. They got blown out by the Saints. They're able to rally. Doug Peterson was able to help get that ship righted, and they roll into the playoffs. We have seen the other way, though. Look at the 2015 Eagles. The last time that the Eagles lost back-to-back games by 17-plus points before these past 2 weeks was in 2015 when the wheels came off under Chip Kelly and they had those bad losses to Tampa Bay and Detroit, which I'm sure you guys remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The difference between last year and 2015 in large part was the coach. People had given up on Chip. There wasn't a full buy-in on Chip Kelly. But Peterson, they fight for, and they have fought for in the past. We saw it when Carson Wentz went down in 17. We saw it when things went wrong in 18. And now it's 2019. Is it still the same case? I think that's in large part about what this Sunday and the rest of the season is about.
Yeah, it really is. It really is kind of a season-defining Sunday in Buffalo, given where they are right now. But you make all these great points, and that's why I love the column so much, is that, Doug P. is one of these guys where you say, yeah, they fought for him in the past, but now we've got this situation over the last 2 weeks where the locker room has some leaks to it. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that and how that plays into, or maybe it doesn't play into, where the Eagles are right now, at 3-4.
Well, I think that the timing really couldn't be worse for those comments to drop right amid, it was entering a huge game against Dallas, coming off of a bad loss against Minnesota, and I don't think really helped matters and something that they had to take energy towards, and it seems like they addressed it internally to some degree at the start of the week. And so at least it's being paid attention to. Carson Wentz called it concerning during his press conference yesterday. All that being said, I don't think it represents like this big crack in the foundation in the locker room. I talked with Jason Kelsey yesterday, and he said that he's not really sensing any dissent right now. He likened it more to, somebody just kind of talking freely, and then the next thing you know, kind of ends up as, out in public, and kind of at the worst time where it seems like there's some turmoil or some anti-Carson Wentz sentiment in the locker room. But it doesn't quite feel like that. It feels like that generally the arrows are pointing in a common direction. But there's a cure-all for all that, Harry, and the opposite to that. The cure-all is winning.
Yep.
if they can get a win in Buffalo, if they can string a couple together, they got some big games coming up after that and that 3-game home stretch, then all of a sudden the voice is quiet. All of a sudden it looks more harmonious, but if they can't get their act together on the field, then you're going to be seeing more of that kind of stuff crop up.
Tim, now that you've had so many years to watch him in action, and if it's being on the sidelines while another guy comes in and wins a Super Bowl, or taking over the reins before he gets hurt and now post-injuries, what type of leader is Carson Wentz? Because I don't think fans really have an idea of the type of leader he is outside of just the fact that he is a leader on this football team.
Yeah, I would say an evolving one, first of all. I think that maybe the way that he went about business in the beginning of his career, has changed to a certain extent. Like, he's always type A. Like, he's always he's a demanding leader. He has a lot of input and say in the during the week, the lead up to the game, about the game plan. He wants his thoughts. He's not a wallflower by any stretch of the imagination. I think the experience in 17 and 18 under Nick Foles really brought a lot of different things to light for him, which he and I talked about right before the season started, about how, kind of the California cool, the nothing bothers me, laid back type vibe that Foles approached the craft with in 17 and 18 really resonated with Wentz. And so he hasn't changed into that person, but he has incorporated some of that stuff to try to be a better leader overall. It's kind of a work in progress with him, and obviously we've seen some voices of anonymous dissent over the course of the last 2 years, but I think generally the locker room responds to him pretty well.
Yeah, now Tim McManus joining us from ESPN, covers the Eagles, at Tim McManus on Twitter. We were talking about this the other day, that the offense just doesn't look like it's got any flow to it. They get out to these slow starts, which has gone back to the beginning of last year. I mean, this is now 2 years in a row where the offense is just getting out slow. And a lot of that gets pinned, on Wentz. And I go back to the first 12 or 13 games, whatever it was, before he got hurt in Los Angeles 2 years ago, that offense looked pretty darn good. And that had Torrey Smith in it, and some other different pieces. But that offense looked like it had flow to it. What happened between then and now? Is it the support system with Doug that has changed so much to be blamed, or what else is it?
That's a great question. And they've been searching for answers for really since last year. These slow starts have absolutely plagued them. I don't know that there's an easy answer, because certainly they've spent a lot of brain power on it and haven't been able to get it fixed. But, I think it's fair to bring up the value of Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. Look what Reich has done since he left. I know, personally, I didn't value him to the level that he probably should have been valued. You don't really know when you have a head coach who's also like the offensive play caller,
right,
like what the OC does in that kind of circumstance. But we have seen the value of Frank Reich, I think, manifest itself both by what's happened in Philly and what's happened in Indianapolis in the years since Frank departed here. But also I think that defenses catch up to a certain extent. I don't know that there's these many gimme throws for quarterbacks as there have been in the past, where scheme is flipping these guys open. And I also think that a couple things with Wentz. One, I think that he still struggles at times to operate properly within the construct of the play. And I was talking with Dan Orlovsky, who's brilliant at this kind of stuff the other day, saying that there's times when where Peterson's just asking for give me 3, 4, 5 yards, and Wentz is still trying to take 12. Mm-hmm. And that when you're talking about a lack of flow, I think maybe there's something to be said for that, where play caller and quarterback aren't kind of syncing up or always on the same page in that respect. Number two, I would say that, the wide receivers have let this guy down.
Yeah.
They are number 2 in the NFL in drops, 13 of them. They're number 1 in fumbles with 4.
Wow.
These receivers aren't doing him any favors by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that Peterson and Wentz could use to get in better harmony here. And I think that maybe start rolling Wentz out a little bit more. I mean, if you think about 2017, you think about those deep plays down the field where he's creating. And, of course, there's that fine line given the injury history. But allow him to be him a little bit more is probably a piece of the recipe that needs to be added.
It's crazy. We've seen this before, and I know that people are going to think no, come on, because the surface and clearly the appearance looks different, but how many times have we seen somebody who is better or at least appears to be better without having any type of advanced analytics in front of me, T-Mac, when he is moving, trying to just be forced into the pocket, right? We've seen this here with a couple of quarterbacks, and I wonder, are we already down that road, or is this just way more about preserving his body? Or is that one and the same, I guess?
Well, yeah, I think, and that's what we saw all summer. The one thing that stuck out in training camp is, he didn't break out of the pocket at all. And he was talking about how, I got all these weapons, and why would I need to scramble out? And I think that he was trying to kind of refine the way that he plays the position, and rightfully so, by the way. I mean, you can't be charging in the traffic. You've seen what the results are. You come off of 2 significant injuries like that, and you have to make some adjustments. And I kind of felt, going into this season, that there was going to be an adjustment period for Wentz, where he's trying to find that balance of who he was and who he is. And maybe we've seen some of that come to fruition here. But I do think that, in order for him to be his most successful self, you're going to have to start riding in that direction a little bit more. Doesn't mean be reckless, but find your spots for him to be a playmaker.
All right, Tim. Obviously, Eagles at 3-4. They got some big NFC losses. To Dallas and Minnesota. Also, you can throw in Detroit there too. Although Detroit is fallen off the pace here. But of the couple of teams, let's include Green Bay. Even though the Eagles beat Green Bay, they're now on a great run. Who's the best team in the NFC that you've seen the Eagles play this year?
Yeah, it's probably the Packers. And it's such a weird league because, the Eagles won, the Falcons' only win came against Philadelphia. The Packers' only loss came against Philadelphia. Dallas lost to the Jets. The Eagles crushed the Jets. Granted, quarterback was different. But, I think that kind of speaks to, the openness of the NFC. But the Eagles aren't in that upper echelon yet. I mean, from afar, I've watched Seattle and really respect what they've done and think that they are absolutely formidable. I watched Minnesota up close and recognize that while the Eagles are deficient defensively, Minnesota also has some things going for them on offense that could be dangerous coupled with that D.
Yeah.
So I think that there are some good contenders out there. I think the Eagles are like a mid-tier team right now with, they can get into that conversation.
They're so old, though. And I don't mean that as ancient, but they're old, right? They're one of the oldest teams in the NFL. How do you get around that when you're media? It's one thing when you're winning, right? You're a 10, 11, 12-win team. You got guys that are older performing. That's one thing, T-Mac. But if you finish with 7, 8, 9 wins, and you're not in the playoffs, what do you do when you start to look at that roster so old?
Yeah, and, that if there was a concern outside of the defense coming in is will these guys play up to their expected level, or is the age of the roster going to start catching up with these guys? And I think that you have seen a drop in production from some of these veteran players, and then you've seen injury. I mean, as I'm talking to you, Deshaun Jackson's walking up the steps very slowly and into the NovaCare facility today. He's obviously been a huge absence, but a 32-year-old that went down to injury, and there's been a number of older guys that have had injury and age kind of catch up with them. But yeah, long term, I think it's right to bring up. They need to start hitting on drafts. They need to infuse this roster with youthful talent, cheaper talent for the kind of next wave of Eagles football under Carson Wentz. But they can't use that as an excuse. But going in, people thought that this was a Super Bowl team. Teams hit adversity. Look at what the Colts have hit. They lost their starting quarterback right before the start of the season, and they're still rolling. And there's a lot of blue chippers on this squad, so they need to start playing like it.
Yeah, last one from me, Tim. Given that, the fact that they do have an aging roster, they do have needs still at defensive back. You can even make a case for wide receiver. And less than a week till the trade deadline, do you see them making any draft picks?
Lean towards them making a trade, just knowing the way that Roseman is, knowing that there are ways to get your roster better without necessarily giving up the farm. They were in on Jalen Ramsey. They just weren't in at the level that some other teams were. And the vibe that I'm getting is that they're not as tied to the present as people think, where they're not going to be hamstrung by the idea that they have this weakness, so they have to overspend. I don't think that's where they are. But as we know, Roseman is very active when it comes to trying to plug holes, and there are some. There's a giant one next to Fletcher Cox right now.
Yeah.
2 guys that are going to be getting playing time I've never heard of.
Right.
This week, right? There's one that's defensive back. You name it. There's places for at wide receiver. There's places for this team to get better. So I would probably put the odds on him making a move before the deadline passes.
Yeah, those 2 tackles you're referencing, they brought in from practice squads, I guess. And, I'm looking up where these guys were drafted, and I find out, the one guy in Oakland wasn't drafted, right? The Eagles had him.
Yeah, and God bless him. The one was talking at his locker yesterday, and he's crying about how proud his mom's going to be to see him on national television. It's all great. I mean, it's a cool story for him.
Right.
But when you're talking about, that was supposed to be Malik Jackson, and that was supposed to be the
Tim Jernigan.
Team.
Yeah.
It was the interior, and now you have guys literally coming, off the street. It's not an ideal position, and so that's why I just don't know if the GM's going to sit idly by there.
And of course, Anthony Rush and Albert Huggins are 2 we're talking about. We're just acquired from Oakland and the Texans. All right, Tim.
Real quick. I'm sorry. I do have to ask about the Lane Johnson stuff. Has anything happened since? Because I know that it seemed to catch a lot of people, including the team, his teammates by surprise, T-Mac, now on a Thursday. What's the latest as far as the impact of those comments? And really, has anybody found out not necessarily who he was talking about, but what exactly he was talking about?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a head-scratcher for a lot of coaches and teammates. So like Malcolm Jenkins has commented on it. I talked to Kelsey about it yesterday. Peterson has been asked about it, and all of them are just kind of like, I don't really know what he's talking about. Which, I think it was maybe more like a hypothetical that he was, what the teammates and coaches have taken away have been like little slippages in detail, maybe on the practice field, that when a situation like this comes up, gets paid more attention to and will be called out more and that kind of thing. So I don't feel like, and this is where kind of the two bad losses coupled with some curious comments have made the situation look worse than it really is.
Right.
But I don't think that the late meetings or people being late is like a rampant issue around here.
See, I thought it might be, we had Coughlin time where if you're not 10 minutes early, you're
late.
Maybe it was Lane time where if you're not a half hour early, you're late. And guys were showing up like 15 minutes early, and he was just checking names.
Or it's like Eytan time. You show up like right as the show starts.
Hey, I'm prepped.
Yes.
I feel like that would be, I don't see Lane Johnson as like this big disciplinarian. So I'd probably lean towards the latter.
Thanks.
All right, Tim, great stuff.
Always
always,
you,
it's
man.
great catching up with you. Read him on ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at Tim McManus and watch him on TV. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys, and congrats on the success of the show.
Oh,
Thanks,
thanks.
brother.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.